Gino Yu, catedrático de la Universidad Politécnica de Hong Kong, investigador en los campos de la conciencia, la fenomenología y la neurofisiología, propende por el desarrollo de una ciencia de la conciencia. Señala que lo que sucede alrededor del ser humano influye en cómo éste piensa, siente y actúa. Advierte que profundizar en esa relación podría redundar en el advenimiento de un futuro más brillante para la humanidad. En el mundo mental, el lenguaje, la fisis y la tecné y su relación con la noósfera se asienta en el crecimiento, la supervivencia y el desarrollo humano en términos de entendimiento consciente y de conciencia simbólica.
Hi, my name's Gino Yu. I teach at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I'd like to thank the committee that asked me to give this talk, to present this talk, and very grateful for the opportunity to share with you some of the work that I do and some of the thoughts that I have related to your topic of futures for a new humanity, will, flexibility, and abundance. You can feel free to reach me. I should include my email. I'm mcgino@polyu.edu.hk. I'm sure the organizers can send you my contact, or you can just Google me. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this talk. Apologize, because of the COVID situation and everything, that I can't be there in person, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Little bit about my background. I have a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. I went to UC Berkeley. I taught at USC. I've been in Hong Kong for the last 25 or so years. And my degree is in electrical engineering and computer science, and I've been in digital entertainment for about 30 years. But the last 15 years or so, I do research in consciousness, in phenomenology and neurophysiology. And so phenomenology is your experience of the moment through the senses right now, and then neurophysiology is what's going on in your brain. And so just like in a computer, there's a relationship between the hardware and the software, there seems to be a relationship between the mind and the body. And so my body right now, hopefully when you're seeing this, my body's in Hong Kong, your bodies are in Colombia somewhere, I would imagine. But in this conversation or in this talk, we seem to be somewhere as well. And so what is the relationship kind of between this mental space and the physical body? And there is a relationship in metaphorically, just like there's a relationship between hardware and software in a computer. And so that's what I look at. And I'm not saying what reality is, but I'm just really interested in is how are we processing, how does the body and the mind, what's the relationship between the mind and the body, and how do we process experience? And arguably, and what led me to this, a couple of things led me to this, but one of the ways of looking at it is arguably where we're at right now in this talk is where you're at when you watch a movie, play a video game, or read a book. And so how do things that happen around us influence how we think, how we feel, and how we behave? And so whether it's a movie or a video game or a book, it's influencing the psychology and the physiology in some way. And it's, in a sense, kind of programming it. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you a little, this talk is about, and really looking at from the individual's perspective and from humanity's perspective, what's going on here and where is us all going, and how do we develop a brighter future for all of us. And so really looking at this and looking at it from a child's perspective or a baby, arguably when you're born, there is no symbolic consciousness. And what happens with us is first awareness, consciousness becomes aware of itself. Usually you become aware from a baby's perspective, you become aware of the body, you become aware of your surroundings. You realize that there are objects in the surroundings, and then you realize that there are relationships between the objects in the surroundings, and then we start developing symbolic consciousness. And again, so right now my body's in Hong Kong, and it's still August here in Hong Kong, and then you're actually probably in the future if you're watching this right now. And so we're not even in the same time right now. but we seem to be somewhere as well, and we are kind of in this mental space. And you know, a deep, interesting question is, where are we right now? Where is this mental processing or the experience of this, and even the thinking of this happening? And we'll just call this realm symbolic consciousness. And this is kind of where we're at. And so if we look at this, what are the origins of this mental world? And so if you think of this, physically, my body's in Hong Kong and your bodies are in Colombia, but in this mental space, we seem to be somewhere. And where did this start? And so right now I'm using the English language, which someone created. Many people before us were speaking habla español. You could probably understand that. And that's all happening kind of in this mental space as well too. But part of this is like, where is this? Now, the ancient Greeks were very careful to distinguish between physis, which are things that happen in nature, and techne, and I'll get to that in a second. But arguably where we're at right now is in this symbolic realm of language it's a shared environment right now, because assuming that you also understand the English language. And so how did this all come about? And so at some time way earlier before, if you want to talk about the Bible, we can talk about biblical Adam, or we can talk about the first person that became conscious. What happened in this, with this mental world, in this mental world, is somebody, you know, here's an example. Someone observes nature. And so if you look at this slide, sunflowers as an example, and then he has the idea of sunflower. And so there's a concept of sunflower that he experiences within nature. With that, he comes up with a representation, and with a representation, we can communicate it. And with this communication, another person can understand it, have an idea of what a sunflower is, or we can talk about it. Or, and the interesting thing about this is it can be preserved. The ideas can be preserved in media, like what's happening right now, and it can be played in the future. And so once you have something in the symbolic realm, it spans space and it spans time. And so that's the power of media, being able to communicate ideas, especially digital media right now with social media and everything, has a huge impact on how people think and how people behave, as we know. And so with this, you know, with symbolic consciousness, you can then communicate to other people. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, the ancient Greeks were careful to distinguish between physis, which are just things that happen naturally within nature, and techne, that have gone through the filter of the mind. So somebody thought about something and then created something. And the ancient Greeks were very careful to distinguish between the two. And so if something happened, like in the stars, in the heavens, if a star went supernova, the ancient Greeks would say that's physis. That star is acting in its true nature. But everything that you see around you right now, and everything here, like the pictures of me and my wife, this microphone that I'm using in the computer, everything has come from somebody's mind. And with this, and they were careful to distinguish, because once you have something that's been within language, it's and codified, it's an abstraction. And you may have heard the term, the map is not the territory, the representation is not the experience. And this leads to problems, which I'll get to a little bit later. And so there's physis and there's techne. And so this mental space that we're in, there's a Jesuit priest named Teilhard de Chardin. He calls this the noosphere. So from an evolutionary perspective, there was the geosphere, which is the planet, and then the atmosphere, which is kind of the oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide and everything. And then there's the biosphere, which are all the living things that are on the planet. And then this noosphere, which is kind of this mental space where we're at right now in this conversation. Now, it turns out from kind of biblical Adam to today, with each generation of people, new knowledge gets accumulated, and this noosphere continues to grow. And so there are these many languages, every book that someone's written, all of these things that have been kind of experienced and communicated are kind of in this mental space of the noosphere. Now, it turns out when babies are born, they're basically just like biblical Adam or that first person that became self-aware, and the education system brings them to where consensus reality is. And so we're born, and then we go to school. Our parents lay their conditioning. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we're educated to basically catch up with the modern world in consensus reality. And so people that are born today are now using iPads and iPhones and everything and computers, whereas when I was born, I really didn't have that as a child. And so what people learn through the different ages is going to be very different. And we're basically working towards catching up with modern society and consensus reality. And so the education system is to take us from not knowing anything to being able to function and operate and thrive in the modern world. Now, this is going to be a big jump, but if you think of everyone that's ever existed, and their collective intention of every conscious person that's ever existed, the material world, space and time, is just physis, which is just nature and things that have happened in nature, and the collective intention of everyone that's ever existed in techne, and that's created kind of this modern world. So if you think of the modern world today, it's kind of like Minecraft. And so early on with biblical Adam, or the first person that became self-aware, their issues in life were, can I find shelter? Can I find food? Can I procreate? What animals and what plants should I avoid? But today it's about making money and surviving and being able to put a roof over my head, paying taxes, being able to drive a car, all of these things. And these skills are very different from before, but arguably we're still kind of in this survive, thrive realm. And the material world is kind of like Minecraft. If you're familiar with the game Minecraft, when you go into the Minecraft world, everything that's there was created by people before you. And in a similar way, everything that you see around you, if you're indoors right now, I have a lot of books and everything was invented and created by people before us. And so it's this projection of this mental space in this noosphere and the collective intention working with nature, with physis. And so that's, and because of that, and as a result of that, I've been reading a little too much news today as well too. But if you look at kind of the global warming situation in the modern world today, this is my family in the middle, we're kind of in trouble. If you look at, what they're predicting of global warming, and there are fires all around the world right now, and temperatures are changing, and there's water is an issue. There are a lot of issues, mainly because of these systems that people have created, engaging in nature, and the legacy of these systems, and the brittleness of them, or just the habitual way of doing things, has, and the growth of all of this, especially if you look at the population over the last 50 years or so, it's exponential, and it's arguably not sustainable unless drastic changes. And so part of this challenge too, in how we take what we know and then we kind of pass it on to the next generation. And the scary thing about this too is that there's been this unspoken of covenant. And the idea is that you inherit the planet, from your parents, you kind of take care of it, and then you kind of give it to the next generation, ideally in better shape than when you got it. And that's been true for thousands of years, arguably until very recently. And part of this problem is, and this is a quote from Khalil Gibran in his book, The Prophet, is generally speaking, and this is kind of my philosophy philosophy on parenting as well too, is for children, you may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. And so part of the problem that we have today is that we've constantly in the whole education system and culture and the way things are developed, is there's an emphasis of making the next generation more like us so that they can kind of progress. And so this, I think, is a problem, especially which then inhibits the potential for change and the drastic change that's needed for this future. And so now, if we look at the development of children and of people, generally speaking, is we're in the way that we educate our children today is, the children are born with instincts or certain things that they know how to do naturally. And then with the education system, we kind of have them develop the intellect. And that's kind of as far as we go. And it's up to them to work towards kind of developing intuition and insight. And this is kind of the Western framing of things, which is also more and more the Eastern framing of things. And I'll talk about the differences between the Eastern and the Western perspectives shortly. And so, and part of the development, no matter where you're at, is that the only real difference between people is that they're at different stages of development. And so if you're familiar with Jean Piaget and developmental psychology, kids learn to walk before they run. There are certain ages where they develop language skills. And as they live, and Jean Piaget was the father of developmental psychology. And what he did was he kind of watched his kids grow and really mapped out, these different stages of development. Now, it turns out as you live your life, your worldview also continues to change. And there's another guy named Claire Graves that also mapped out, I'll get to that in a second too, that also mapped out kind of these levels of existence. And so and what I mean by that is, if you look at the decisions you make today, they're probably very different from the decisions you might have made, 5 or 10 or even 20 years ago. And so as we live our life, our worldview continues to change. And everyone starts out kind of as a clean slate. And as we live our life through the traumas and all of these things that happen, we all kind of develop. And the only real difference between people is that they're just at different stages of development. And so that leads into this process of, how is it that a newborn baby can then kind of develop their own ideas and their own drive and everything. And so we're born with instincts, as I mentioned, and then usually our parents lay their conditioning on you. And what usually happens is we're born kind of clear. Your parents kind of create an environment for you to develop in, and this is the household that you grow in for the formative years of your life. And then usually when you hit 12 or you hit puberty, you kind of break beyond that, and then you go into consensus reality. It's your friends, then culture and society, and there are a lot of people are happy within this society, this so-called modern society that we live in, which isn't very sustainable, as I pointed out earlier. And some people, though, kind of break out of that as well, too, especially those of you kind of in Central and South America. You have people that use plant medicines, and they actually become aware of realities that are kind of beyond the reality of consensus reality. But for most people, what happens right now in the way society is structured, it's society, culture, and then media. And then the media influences people. And a lot of these, the development of these relate to the development of the physical structures in the brain. And so you have the medulla which is the brain stem, which covers your basics. And then you have the limbic system, which are kind of the emotional development, usually for first 7 years of life. And then you have the cortex and your beliefs and the thoughts and everything. And all of these thoughts use the same underlying emotions, which are also built upon the basic drives that are keeping your body physically alive. And it's all these physiological processes projected into this mental realm that then influences how you feel and your motivations. Now, with this, and part of the situation today is there's a term called kind of the right-hand path, and the systems and structures that the modern world has created. And this is conventional practice, and you submit to the orthodox. And then there's the left-hand path, which is any true entrepreneur, any true scientist, and any true artist. And right now, part of the situation with society is there's a focus on developing these right-hand path systems, and it's just business as usual, which has kind of led to us to this environmental crisis and social crises that we have today, versus kind of these left-hand path, who are kind of the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the artists. And part of the reason I threw this in is to talk about and explore this a little bit and make a motivation for how we educate and how we bring people up, and developing ways of supporting and nurturing these kind of left-hand path people, and allowing them to find their own inner truth and within the context of modern society to create the new systems. And that's where I'm trying to go with this talk. But right now, the systems I teach at a university. Universities are very structured, and necessarily so, because you have to take someone that knows nothing and then bring them to kind of the edge of knowledge. And that's what a PhD is about: getting you to the edge of knowledge and then creating new knowledge, which is how this noosphere and our collective understanding continues to expand. And the person that's recording this talk, Daniel, just finished his thesis to contribute some new knowledge. And so I mentioned earlier Clare Graves, and this is his levels of existence. So he has a model of this. I'm not going to go too deep into this. Clare Graves was the original person that came up with this in 1974. If you're familiar with Don Beck or Ken Wilber or integral theory, they're really looking at the development. And so normally you think of everybody as the same, but if you start looking at kind of where they're at in terms of their level of development and the way that they think and they structure things, you can get a better sense of, especially American politics today, the DQ, avoidant learning, the operant conditioning, if you're familiar with these totalitarian approaches, versus kind of the more liberal approaches of FS, the observational and relativistic. If you have an understanding of this, you'll have a pretty good understanding you have between different worldview levels, thoughts, and everything. And so, but I'll leave this here because that's the subject of a whole nother talk. This is a subject of a whole nother talk again as well, too, is that if you look at traditional psychology, you have the anima animus, you have the shadow, the self, and it projects out, and the ego, your conscious awareness, becomes aware of all of these things that are suppressed within you and coming up within you by way of projection. And so kind of the people, the animals, the trees, and everything are things that are out here that then something happens that makes me feel a certain way. My girlfriend, my boyfriend, this job that I really want, all of these things are experienced by way of projection. And it's a projection of the anima animus, the shadow, and the self. And then we wear, there's the persona, personae, which are the masks that we wear. I'm kind of wearing the mask of an educator right now. And then there's the community, law, nature, and then the transcendent mystery source from which all things arise. And so this is taken from a video called Psyche and Symbol, by Joseph Campbell, illustrating Jung's work, Carl Jung's work. I've extended this by looking at things from a consciousness perspective of recognizing that everything that's happening in the mind, one of the ways that can be explained is through physiological processes. And so in my body, I have emotions that are projected into these, which create feelings. And then as I experience the world, I start building this mental worldview. These symbols and the relationships between them influence how I feel and motivate my action, which then reinforces this worldview, which influences the physiology, which motivates the action. And so whether it's the real world as an external world or a video game or a movie, I'm experiencing it as some symbols that influence how I feel. And as I do this, my worldview continues to change. And then this binding of the stories and ideas to the feelings and emotions become my ego. And this is the subject of another long talk. And this is a subject of another long talk as well, too. But if you search online, if you're interested, if you search personal development, mental health, and human potential, Gino Yu, you'll see a whole talk around this. And we have a whole framework that we've developed looking at personal development, mental health, and human potential. Now, without getting, so personal development, again, is your developmental psychology, early attachment theory, the Jean Piaget, the Claire Graves stuff. Mental health is when things go awry. And then human potential, actually, we actually research people with non-ordinary abilities. And so people that have different forms of knowing, creativity, all of these things, people that have interesting abilities. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And that's kind of the side of human potential. But again, these are all models of development. And so here, rather than a structured approach of the education system, which is in dire need of reform, especially now that digital technologies are possible and everything, is really looking at, can we understand personal development and then really bring education back to its original roots, towards self-knowledge and helping people understand, who are you, why are you here, and how do we, and what's your role kind of in all of this. And so these are all kind of frameworks and models for development. And so generally speaking, we're born into consensus reality, and then there's the outliers, the artists, the entrepreneurs, scientists, and then the area that I look at related to the mental health is I look at spiritual emergencies. And so usually what happens is when someone pushes really hard or something, non-ordinary things start happening to them, and they start developing. Look up the term spiritual emergency. So a lot of people, some people start having experiences, and then usually what happens after that is they require stabilization, sustainability, and then thriving. And so this ties again into, which I haven't really talked too much about, is the human potential. And so part of the reason I'm showing this slide too is on the right side of this. There, right now, modern society is just very good at the consensus reality realm. And a lot of the things that in terms of will and abundance and all of those terms that are related to this future, I think a very important aspect of the future is really bringing out the human potential and what humans are capable of related to abilities that can be realized within individuals. And so related to this too, and this is more kind of the mystical path, which is more this left-hand approach that I had earlier talked about. And part of the challenge today is the lack of support for that, in that there's a term I love from Joseph Campbell, who was the one that put the slide, 3 slides earlier, is that the psychotic drowns in the same water in which the mystic swims with delight. And I know if you look in Central and South America, actually all around the world, there are all of these indigenous wisdom traditions. I think in I guess you would call it shamans or medicine men, and they use plant medicines and these ways of helping people gain greater clarity in realms that perhaps the Western world is the modern world at least is not doesn't appreciate or fully understand. And so part of the discussion here is recognizing the heritage and the wisdom, within all the indigenous traditions, and then bringing it more to the modern world in an appreciated and understood. This is that we're doing here. And so if we look at how we communicate reality, again, back to the indigenous realm, 5,000 years ago, your understanding of reality was dictated by where on the planet you lived and what the religious tradition was. And part of the problem is, since Aristotle, there's been a split between kind of the material domain, which kind of became science, which is arguably what a lot of modern society perceive as reality. And then you have religion and culture, which are kind of more in this mental domain. And, I talked about kind of East and I talked about kind of modern and more indigenous, but then also there's kind of an Eastern and a Western framing of reality. And a lot of this ties into, the Western framing of reality is, this is me, and all of this is not me. And it's a material basis for reality. I'm going to go explore, conquer, discover, and then God or someone will judge me later on. And that's kind of the Western framing of reality. The Eastern framing of reality is, this is me, but I'm part of this. And I can't explain who I am without explaining what this is. And the journey here is, it's an inner journey. It's an inner journey. And if you look at the heroes of the West, of Napoleon or Steve Jobs, and if you look at the heroes of the East, of Buddha or Gandhi, the approaches are very different, and the searches are very different. And one is kind of going out here, conquering and discovering, and really making kind of innovations kind of in the material realm. And then the other approach is really in the inner realm. And so meditation and all of these kind of Eastern practices towards self-realization of, who you truly are. And so future innovation will require, and education will require, both kind of a Western approach of appreciating and understanding the material world, and an Eastern approach of really kind of this inner world. And with deeper roots, we can kind of grow higher as a collective. And the exciting thing about this now, too, in the area that we're doing, coming back to the origins of this, of understanding consciousness and the mind-body relationship, is the exciting thing is now with interactive media and with real-time biometrics, and I'm measuring my heartbeat, and you can measure your brain waves and everything, there's a convergence. And with video games and interactive media, I can create a stimuli. But then by seeing the conscious decisions you make and how your physiology responds, you can start understanding a person's psychology as well, too. And then once you have something that's embodied, it's objective, it's measurable, and you can build the science around it. And so these are all really exciting developments over the last years. And a lot of people now are doing a lot with like plant medicines and everything, and looking what's happening to people's brains, deep meditation, what's happening with people's brains. And we can really work towards studying this. On this slide, I wanted to throw in here, because generally speaking, once we have kind of the basics of life sorted out, what usually drives people are the big stories. And the big stories, here I've got it broken into, is it on the vertical axis, or the horizontal, is it self-centered? Is it about me, or is it about us? And then the other one, as I mentioned earlier, is the inner world primary, or is the material world primary? If I'm self-centered and the material world is primary, then what motivates me is money, sex, power, or trying to live forever. And so those are the narratives that are driving kind of people along those lines. And we can imagine, some people come to mind when you think of these motivations. The other is a material world is primary and collective centered. And if I'm collective centered, it's about us, but material world is primary, then it's either philanthropy where, like all these foundations, I set up a foundation to help the poor, help education, help women, etc. Or it's the Star Trek idea of the technological singularity, that your consciousness can be thrown onto a chip. We can go to Mars and all of these things. Material world is primary, collective centered. If I'm inner world primary and self-centered, then it's about becoming a body of light. And so if you go to India and China, especially in the East, where a lot of people view the inner world as primary, you have these people that will just meditate in caves or on mountains, and some people even figured out the death yoga. They can kind of leave their body, and the premise is that there were 7 billion people. A couple of them are making it to the next level. You guys do what you're going to do. Kind of, I'm gonna just kind of go to the next level and hope to see you there. And then if you're inner world primary and collective centered, then it's about collective awakening. So how do you kind of wake up the whole planet? And the premise is that if everyone on the planet to reconnect to and to live from kind of the innate joy of being, or having their mind, their body, kind of, and their environment in harmony, then that will bring us to wherever we're going next as a collective. And for me, and a lot of the people that I work with, we're kind of in this inner world primary and collective centered box. And that's my view of kind of the future, and a little bit around where we're at society today, the differences between kind of the old world and the new world, the East and the West, and the challenges that we have, the education system, which is a right-hand path, versus supporting kind of the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the artists that are needed today to help move us along towards a greater self-realization. And that's my talk. Thank you.
Un paneo actual de la humanidad revela estados de desarrollo, pautas simbólicas y paradigmas culturales como experiencias de dualidad e integridad. Crear una ciencia de la conciencia permitiría avistar una humanidad que en términos de futuro viva la aproximación Oriente-Occidente, la quietud como motor para la acción, la intuición, la respiración, la desconexión de los símbolos y la reconexión con el ser, una humanidad en estado de flujo y en presencia con la existencia.